stay aligned to what your core values actually are, but really know what your core values are.
What really led you to explore entrepreneurship?
Our journey through flipping houses, what that did is it opened a lot of different doors.
I'm excited to introduce Tyler Goble.
It is okay for things to be very, very difficult.
Things might not be exactly what you think they are.
And so there's a double-edged sword to that equation.
The people that get results are the people that are rewarded. In business, you see this too. If you can get results, bring people value, you're going to be rewarded.
Looking back in time, I don't know that I would have these standing calls.
Welcome back to Diehard Entrepreneur Stories. I'm Devin Ramos, your host, and today I'm excited to introduce Tyler Goble, a U.S. Naval Academy graduate, Marine Corps infantry officer, and entrepreneur with a passion for making a difference. While searching for a way to make a deeper impact, Tyler co-founded LTG Investments with his wife, Lindsay, to create a business that is community-driven and enables generosity. Their journey began with their first flip, which showed them that entrepreneurship could have a greater impact than philanthropy alone. Since then, Tyler and Lindsay have done several profitable projects and contributed proceeds to Unbound Now, an anti-human trafficking organization. Tyler now leverages his expertise in investor relations, marketing, and risk management to guide LTG Investments and LTG Assist, a VA staffing agency that helps businesses thrive. And today he's going to share his story with you. Welcome, Tyler.
Devin, so good to see you again, man. And before we start recording, it's crazy. It's been like 2 years since me and you talked one-on-one. But we've just been kind of passing in the hallways of LinkedIn and networking events and stuff like that. And so it's really, really good to talk again, man. I've missed you.
I've missed you too, man. And I think it's really cool. You'd mentioned this a little bit, but it's sort of like a testament to the benefits of social media in that, like, for whatever reason, the algorithms have you and me, it sounds like, in each other's feeds. And so I didn't realize it had been 2 years or more. We were talking about it could possibly be more, right? I didn't know that because I still feel like I get to see part of your life and see some of the things you're doing, not so much in depth. So I don't know. I thought that was pretty cool, right? You like feel like you kind of still know somebody, even though we hadn't got a lot of this good one-on-one time like we're going to get in today, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on, kind of getting the chat, man.
I look forward to it. Cool. So Tyler, for our audience, if you would just give us a little bit of your background on, what led up to becoming an entrepreneur. I know you're a fellow Michigander, right? My wife
That's
is
right.
as well. So we have that in common. You joined the Marine Corps. I even know some of your family. I served with some of your family, right?
That's right.
You're a huge patriot. But what really led you to explore entrepreneurship, especially as an active duty Marine Corps infantry officer?
It is crazy how small the world is. My Uncle Tony, before I went to the Naval Academy, I went down to Fort Campbell with my the men in my family, and we played paintball against Uncle Tony, who's like Chief Warrant Officer 5 Tony.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about the military back then. And Uncle Tony was like wearing silkies and like a t-shirt and his paintball mask and just running through the woods. Very similar to like the Patriot, Mel Gibson and the Patriot, and the redcoats are just kind of walking on the road and then getting ambushed. And that's what it felt like trying to play paintball against Uncle Tony, where we just never knew where he was. We were just getting pelted with pebbles.
And just getting crushed, dude.
Just getting crushed. But it's funny how that came full circle with our relationship. But yeah, I mean, to go quick, like soup to nuts of kind of my journey through life up till this point. Started off growing up in Michigan, just like you said, and I had always played sports growing up. And so for me, football was kind of like the end all be all. That's what I wanted to do. Weirdly, I only wanted to play college. I didn't necessarily like have a dream of going to the NFL. But college football basically led me to the Naval Academy. And when I went to the Naval Academy, I was basically like, Mom, there's no way I would do something crazy like go join the Marine Corps or like do anything like that. Like, I will go sit on a boat for 5 years. I'll get out. I'll go to business school. I'll do something like that. Like the opportunities there seem pretty big. And I'll get to play football, Division I football. And so went to the Naval Academy, and I always tell folks that the academy's got a funny way of like funneling you to the service selection that you're supposed to be in. And I am not a SWO, surface warfare officer. Like, I went on a boat for like 2 weeks and I was like, this is for the birds. Like, this is terrible. Everything against SWOs, right? Some of my best buddies are SWOs. So like, all disrespect to SWOs. They look miserable. Like, oh my gosh. They're like, the only thing they drink is coffee. They're standing watch. And so I got 2 weeks experience of doing that while I was at the academy. And I was like, this is not for me. Like, this
no,
stinks.
thank you.
I was like, well, maybe I'll go fly. Newsflash, if you fly, your service commitment's like 10 years, like pretty much off the bat, because you got to go to flight school. You got to do these different things. And I'm like, don't worry, Mom. There's no way I would go get on a plane and serve for 10 years. Like, that's crazy. I'd be 32 years old when I get out. I'm still in and I'm 31. So it's kind of like a series of me just saying I'm like, no way would I do that thing. All of my best buddies, I played inside linebacker as well. So like, all the inside linebackers pretty much go into the Marine Corps, and pretty much all of them go Marine Corps ground. And so I was like, well, I'll go Marine Corps ground, but don't worry, Mom, there's no way I would do something stupid like join the infantry or something like that. That seems like a terrible idea. And then sure enough, you can probably guess, but was fortunate enough to get to go to infantry officer course, become an infantry officer through that process. Found like the best people ever in that community. And those were the people that just kind of jived with me. And so that was pretty much me from like age 7 to age 23, like graduating IOC, going down to Camp Lejeune, showing my first unit down there. And that's kind of where entrepreneurship seeds, I say, would be planted, because I was the guy who bought the house that everyone lived in. And so when we were at IOC, nice. It was like, well, I don't want to pay rent. Yeah. I also don't want to like live in a house by myself. Like, I'll miss all my friends. When you go to Navy and you play football in Navy, you develop like really, really good core relationships with folks. And it becomes weird to kind of be alone, if that makes sense. You can probably relate to that in the military. It's like, I'm always having my buddies around. Like, at no point does it make sense for me to like just go buy a house and live in it by myself, or like, and I have no desire for that. And so I bought a 5-bedroom house in North Carolina, and all 4 of the people that rented it out were just other infantry officers that were showing up to their first unit for my IOC class. And so that was before like house hacking and like bigger pockets had really taken off. And so I was like, this is great. Like, I just took my mortgage, divided it by 4. Like, these guys are paying $400 a month for rent. They're happy. Like, I don't have to pay anything for my mortgage. It's great. And then I just put my head down for 2 years, really, and was trying to become the best officer I could be, trying to lead my Marines. Went on one deployment to Japan, if you can call that a deployment. It was like 6 months in Okinawa, mainland Japan, the Philippines, doing kind of like an assist train kind of stuff over there. And in the process of that 2 years, I also thought I was going to be alone forever. Because I was like, there's no way you don't meet your wife like when you're putting in the hours you're putting in the infantry battalion as a lieutenant, especially if you're trying to do a good job. And so literally out of the sky, my roommate from the academy put a good word in for me with my now wife, Lindsay, and said, you got to meet Tyler, like best guy I know. Like, I slipped him a 20. And so he basically introduced me to my wife, and we had started dating long-term basically within the first month of me showing up to 3-6, infantry battalion, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines. And after that 2-year period and coming home from that deployment, we were engaged, and we got married in October of 2019. And so that was like, in the life cycle of an infantry officer, you have basically show up to your first unit, do a workup, deploy, and then if you have the legs to make the next deployment, you do, or you do the workup and then transfer to a B billet. That's just kind of the op tempo for infantry battalions right now. And so when we had shown up to 3-6, they were on the 24th MEU in Syria, kind of doing that, the artillery mission into Syria, burning up howitzers and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think you might be familiar. That's why I said that. Yeah. And so they got back. We did a full 18-month workup for the UDP. So we got like every phase of the training process, did the service level training exercise and 29 Palms for the Marine Corps, deployed for 6 months. And so basically 2 years to the date, I fleeted up to be the weapons company XO and did a 12-month workup basically with those guys to prep them to go to Norway for a cold weather deployment. But 3 years time on station basically is when they rotate you. So it didn't make the deployment for that. Also, my wife didn't want to live in the frat house with 5 lieutenants. And so this is really where the real estate stuff kind of kicks off is I bought a house down the street that had gotten smoked by Hurricane Florence, which is like 2017, 2018, ripped its way up the East Coast. And so that was the house that we moved into, but it had no ceilings. It had no insulation. The electrical was all jacked up. And so I got to do all the work. Basically, we hired out some stuff. Like I didn't have the ability to like hang the drywall into the ceiling. And so like that kind of stuff we hired out. But other than that, I got to do a lot of the different trades, got to supervise a lot of different trades and kind of put a house together from the start. And Lindsay got to design the whole house. So she got to pick out everything, got to like discover a passion for her for design that she didn't know she had. She was like a kinesiology major, like danced on the dance team at Dallas Baptist University. And so design, not really in that thing, but she realized that she really loved it. And so that house, we lived in it. And then when we got orders out to Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, that was like the light bulb for us because we sold those 2 properties I had bought in North Carolina. And so newly married, bought a house in Monterey. We're also like the smartest people in the world because we bought it in 2020 before everything went insane. And so like,
that's amazing.
I always laughed at, bought new construction in 2020 in California. Like those 3 things, if you just do those 3 things, you can be rich. But, it's like timing and luck is so much in real estate in a lot of ways. You make your own luck, but also it's nice to be lucky. And so we sold those 2 properties and we're also Christians. And so newly married, trying to figure out like our tithe from my paycheck made a lot of sense. You just take your 10%, you give it to the church. But what happens when you get a $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 dump in your account? Do you tithe off of that? Like, do you just give that right to the church or do you give it to something different? And so that was something that was awesome to happen early on in marriage for us to kind of be aligned on what are we going to be generous with, and what does that look like? And my mother-in-law, she runs an anti-human trafficking nonprofit called Unbound Now. And me being the husband, like I didn't know whether Susan was running this thing on her laptop in a garage and like just like sending out inspirational messages or like what are they doing? But it's like a very legit operation. They've got like a $10 million budget. They're doing work all over the place. The state of Louisiana brought them in to stand up their own anti-trafficking like processes and procedures. And so like very, very much a very excellent organization. I had no idea though. I was just trying to be a good husband, and like we took $5,000, gave it to Unbound, and Susan called me and she said, Tyler, just so you understand, like this money is able for us, because we're paying people overseas, we're very efficient with what we're doing. $5,000 is almost enough to cover a full-time person in a country like Mongolia that does nothing but stop anti-trafficking work or anti-traffickers from like doing stuff for an entire year. And so thank you so much for giving that. It's like really important. And when she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, like in America, $5,000, it might be a lot to some people, but it's really not that much money if we're going to be completely honest with ourselves. Right. And so, and we did that basically by accident, right? We just bought a house, we put some sweat equity into it, sold it, and we're able to do that. And so the program I got sent to at NPS is a operations research, which is a lot of like data science, machine learning, AI, but very, very numbers, very, very statistic driven. And that's kind of my personality as well. And so I immediately made a spreadsheet and I was like, $5,000, like if we just flip one house, we could basically pay for somebody's salary for an entire year off of one house. But as I started learning more about like, what would it take to actually flip a house? It's like, if you're going to flip one house, you might as well flip a couple houses, because you got to build all the systems in place to manage one correctly. And it's not like it's a lot of additional work to do two houses. And then it's like, well, if you're going to do 2 houses, you might as well do 3 houses. It's like, well, if you're going to do 3 houses, like you're probably going to need to have access to capital to be able to do more than that. So how do you start building those things out? And so it was kind of an iterative process, but led us to basically start a house flipping company that was located in California, but flipping houses in Texas. It was basically what we landed on, long story short. And that was kind of the first 2 years of our existence as entrepreneurs. Was how do you figure out how to flip a house from 2,000 miles away, using other people's money, managing contractors. And we can dive deep into that. But is it helpful for me just to sprint all the way through to where we're at right now?
I love that, man. There's so much good there. What I love is you basically teased out for us how you fell into entrepreneurship, right? And the cool thing is to see your motivations along the way. It really was shaped by you trying to be a really good steward is what I heard. And then after you met Lindsay, it was, where like how do we give back with this? Like we're going to be faithful. We're going to do this. What does that look like? And just, I'm sure you can attest to this, but it sounds like y'all were just faithful and took steps forward one after the other. This would be a good question for you. I think I probably know the answer, but if you went back to just meeting Lindsay and sort of, you're like solving another problem. All right, let me move into this house here. If you were standing from that vantage point, looking at where you're at now, I mean, would you have seen that? Like, would that have even been in the cards for you?
It's so funny because, when I asked her dad if I could marry her, one of the first things that he said was like, now Tyler, like he said yes, which was great. But one of the things he said was like, Lindsay's got 3 sisters. All 3 of them work. One of them's a doctor. One of them's like super great at tech sales. One of them's like an accountant, bookkeeper. They all like have careers that they're like pursuing. But for Lindsay, he was like, she probably ain't going to work. Like, are you all right with that? She kind of wants to be like a homemaker, like all those kinds of things. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care about that at all. Like, it's not a column, not a row in my spreadsheet. Doesn't matter. Like, we'll figure it out. But ironically, like, you think you know this, she's working way more now as an entrepreneur than she would be working for anybody, right? And so it's just funny how God kind of weaves those different things together and puts you in position to like discover passions that you actually want to pursue more so than like working part-time to save for your wedding at a dental hygienist place. Like that's what she was doing before we got married. And it's like, that was soul crushing. Like that's not what you want to be doing. But anyways, yeah, it's hard to really, like, it's easy to see the steps when you go and look at it in hindsight. But the thing that, especially for like 2025, like we're recording this the day after New Year's, the thing that I always try to do, and we didn't get to this point until probably 4 or 5 years down the road of entrepreneurship, is stay aligned to what your core values actually are, but really know what your core values are. And it's hard to know what your core values are until you've actually been stress tested and been pushed and had to really think about like, what are the things that I actually care about? And I know, at least for me, it's hard to be that self-aware until you actually put yourself into positions where you're getting pushed and you're actually like I know, Devin, like you're a Green Beret, like a very high performing individual. There's very rarely things that you can't actually just brute force, make your way, like make it work. And I feel similar in that. It's like majority of my life, I'd been able to kind of brute force a lot of stuff, but entrepreneurship isn't like that, which is a hard pill to swallow for folks sometimes. And so until you kind of reach the end of yourself and you have to rely on others, rely on your faith, all those different things to kind of be able to persevere, I don't think you really uncover what your core values are. And for us, the core values of community, work, and generosity are pretty much what we hang our hats on. And looking back through it, everything foundationally has always been community driven, whether it's buying that first house and wanting to live with my buddies to now where we're hiring people for other people's companies that are relational, doing all those different things. I can see how God kind of wired us to be community driven.
I love that so much that you highlight that. I also really like what I heard from you talking about making sure that you're aligned and you can't really always see the future. But what I heard through your story is that you are always continuing to take a step forward. I think if I asked you pointedly, you'd probably say you were walking in faith. That's kind of how I heard it. You maybe didn't know what it looked like. You didn't know what led to you contributing to Unbound was going to look like that. You were just initially like, hey, we got this money. We're faithful. We're going to tithe. I need to figure that part out. And then took a step. Then you get a little more clarity. And then it's like you took another step. Then you got a little more clarity. And that's sort of what I heard in your story. So the big takeaway for me is just continuing to walk in faith, man. Like, especially as an entrepreneur, that's a reminder that I need because things can 180 very quickly, right? And it can be really hard to not want to 180 with them. And to like keep just taking a step forward, even though it's getting like fuzzier and fuzzier and hazier and hazier. But I know, and this is, my testament from the past. Every time I do that, it's just, eventually at some point I'm like, oh, all right, gotcha. That's, I see it. Okay. And I do end up getting clarity.
You and I specifically, and probably people that are like wanting to listen to podcasts like this, you're so steeped in this like make it happen right now culture. Like I was Forbes, whatever the Forbes 40 under 40 or whatever the crazy list is that you can get put on, that you have this conception that everyone is making it by the time that they're X years old, or they were only an entrepreneur for X amount of years before they really figured out exactly what they're doing. But almost everybody's just marketing to you as well. It's so like some of those people that have quote unquote figured it out is just marketing for the current business that they're working on. But we've been really, really fortunate to have some really awesome mentors and people that are like 90-degree turn from the marketing world, where you actually know of those people. And the fact is, like, a lot of them hit their stride when they're like in their early 50s. It's like, so like 20 more years for Lindsay and I to really continue to grow. And honestly, I don't think you ever stop growing. But when you reframe like the difference between like actual speed and like sense of urgency, that's what we've been really trying to figure out as we're moving. Is we have a sense of urgency that we want to grow something really, really large. I think God's kind of put it in our hearts to grow something big, but it's on his timeline. The thing that we can control is the sense of urgency and the effort that we put towards those things. And it's an easy thing to say is you can have the sense of urgency, trust God with the speed of which it gets built, because we've been there, and it's painful when you're like, things aren't going the way you need them to, or you need to make that next sale, or you need to close that next house in order to keep the lights on and do certain things. And like waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning with a cold sweat going like, I need to make something happen in the next 2 weeks or else we're going to be in a world of hurt, because we have literally been there. But it's easy to say, it's hard to actually do, I think. But that's one thing I love about entrepreneurship is there's very few, like tying it all the way back to us being able to basically brute force anything that we really want to do in the confines of the military, the confines of school, the confines of football, and all those kinds of things. Entrepreneurship's not like that. And so you actually have to have real faith, I think, a lot of times in entrepreneur land.
That's such a good point. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I don't know that anybody's ever articulated that thought to me that way, but you are 100% right when you say we're trying to brute force our way into things, right? Like, yeah, absolutely. I've done that my whole entire life. And then entrepreneurship isn't like that though. And you can't do that. And yes, you're absolutely right. And I haven't quite got my finger on it, but there's this pattern that follows for me where every time I start brute forcing things, things get significantly harder in all sense. I'm more stressed. We make less money. People enjoy us less. And it's just like, until I kind of like realize that. And then I'm like, oh, and I start to kind of let go and back up and go the other direction, like I'll fall into that trap, right? Because I don't know. It's the way God made me, right? In the sense of it's in my personality, and it's just another problem for me to solve. What's helped you, man? What has worked is like a reminder for you to not do that.
Yeah. Well, being surrounded by a community, and again, kind of driving that back to our true core value. There's some folks that I have standing calls with that they're not high pressure, like, if you don't make this call, like you're like a bad person or anything like that. Like sometimes we'll go like a month without actually getting that call done, but it's on both of our calendars, and they're people that I really trust, I really look up to. They know me really well, and I can green light think with those people about what's going on, like my thoughts, and vice versa for them. Hopefully they're able to do similar things with me, where they're able to kind of not be in a position where they have to be that shiny object for folks. They can be really who they are, and they actually have the struggles that they're having. And so I'd say that's one thing. Probably should have said this first, but like having an awesome wife. Like my wife is like, it's insane how much, like, one, I love her, two, how just great she is at running our house. We don't have kids yet, but like, coming back to the place that I get to live in is insane. It's like beautifully put together, super peaceful. She's really my best friend. And so like living with your best friend like that is like the number one thing that keeps you grounded. She knows me better than anybody else. She knows if I'm like faking things or doing something that's dumb. And honestly, she's like way better at like recognizing that this is a stupid thing to do than I am. I'm kind of like an optimist. And she's not that she's a pessimist, but she'll be like, I don't like the way that conversation went. If I'm on speakerphone with somebody in the call, and she'll be like, I don't like the way that so-and-so talked to you, or I don't like I don't think that that's something that makes sense. Like, why did they ask that question? And she's like the art side of the business. I'm like the science side of the business. And so sometimes I have a tendency to be like, oh, it's because the financing will work out like this and this and this and then all that. And she goes, yeah, but why do we even need that? Like, and I'm like, you know what? That's actually right. And so maybe those two things as a starter.
Yeah, there's such a power in that. So very similarly, I can tell from this conversation, my wife's an inductive reasoner. I'm the deductive reasoner. We're sort of one and the same. I was kind of chuckling over here when you had mentioned that call with your father-in-law, because when my wife and I first got married, she made the comment first, where she's like, I don't really like working. I'm not a good employee. And, she was getting these part-time jobs serving. She went to school for speech language pathology. So she's in school and she's like doing this little part-time work, just to kind of help supplement income, but she didn't really care, to have a career at this point. And, she had some job where, I can't even remember. She's like, she didn't follow the process to call out or something, and she wanted to go with me somewhere. And so she went, and they made it a big deal. And she's just like, okay, I'm done. And I was like, babe, you really are not the greatest employee, And that was almost the turn of where she decided, like, I just want to kind of work for myself. And we went through our whole thing, but through her own self-discovery as an outsider, I was able to see her really embrace like entrepreneurship and like this, newer identity, if you will. And like, yeah, this is, and man, it's so fitting for her. So it's really cool to see that.
Lindsay went back to, school and got her master's in architecture and design. And so like, she hated school. Like, I'm telling you, like, I was doing her like, she had to take one math class in college. I took that math class in college for her, basically.
Nice.
And so she was like the exact opposite of who you would imagine would want to go back to school. And she went back and got a master's of fine arts in interior architecture and design, 3-year program. Like, and so I think when people find the thing that they actually really love doing, it becomes light and easy for them. But I think it's also like fake news to be like, oh yeah, just find the thing that feels light and easy for you. It's like, no, you got to pick up some weights before things start feeling light and easy. And so that was kind of her journey as well. Being very, very different. Like the idea of her like going to networking events and like networking with people like crazy, like I do, is like absolute rat poison to her. She would absolutely hate doing that kind of stuff. But she loves designing and she loves building spaces where people feel home and feel like that. And so it's just really interesting to see the different ways people really kind of get their cup filled up and whatnot.
Yeah, that's pretty neat for sure. So you had brought up these standing calls, which I think is a great idea. I love that. I take it these standing calls are like fellow entrepreneurs, probably very similar core values, probably share faith, like things like that. Am I correct on that?
Yep, absolutely.
That's awesome, man. Yep. I love it. And it's basically just like it's not like super formal. It doesn't sound like, but it's just like hey man, we should have a standing call and talk and sync up. And you just kind of started doing that at some point it became a habit. And
I would say that those got more formalized those happened because I was in formal networking groups. So like the way me and you met was the War Room Mastermind. Dave Frey, shout out Dave. But that structure was instrumental for us. And again, kind of tying it back to community, where before that, it was kind of me just being like, this seems like a good idea. I'm just going to do it. And not really having a tribe of folks to be able to like reach out to and like bounce that idea off people. Because before we decided to flip houses, going back in time a little bit, I had joined the War Room. In my small group there, I was like, maybe it's commercial. Maybe I need to go raise a fund. Maybe I need to do all these other buzzword things I'm hearing on Bigger Pockets. Like maybe I need to do all these different things. But being in that community, probably about 3 months worth of that weekly meetings allowed me to actually narrow in and focus down on something. And so looking back in time, I don't know that I would have these standing calls or those kinds of things, or even thought to really do them if I hadn't initially gotten into a more formalized community and kind of been trained and steeped in the value of doing those things.
You gave a shout out to Dave Bray. I'll give another shout out here. Probably mutual friend of ours, Adam Whitney.
Adam's one of those guys I have one of those calls with.
You had just mentioned getting into the War Room and that whole thing. For me, for some reason, I don't know why, but that wasn't even on my radar. You know, like I've just always been a solo guy. I always kind of been like a lone wolf. Like, man, even on a team, there are certain jobs that you're going to do more solo than others. If there were those jobs, I did those jobs. Like it's kind of always worked like that. And I only say that to say that was sort of my mentality about entrepreneurship. And I had a call at some point with Adam 4+ years ago, man. I don't know, long time ago. And Adam had just like kind of like casually mentioned like, oh, well, have you ever thought about a mastermind or anything like that? He wasn't like pitching nothing. He wasn't like, it was a comment off of something that I had said. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, well, I'm in the War Room. I'm like, what's the War Room? And I was like, that's a great idea. I'm like, so I can hang out with dudes that like are just like us. And he's like, yeah, man. I was like, that's a great idea. So I did it. And then from there, that kind of planted the seed for me to do other masterminds, right, for different things. But like when I look at that, like that really was the seed, man. Like if I wouldn't have, everything has to start somewhere. And if I wouldn't have started there, maybe eventually it would have happened. But so it's really cool that you say that, because I just think about anybody that's in this situation right now that doesn't have that, to get it. I love Think and Grow Rich. I don't know how you feel about that book, but that, the concept of masterminding, which comes from that book, right, is huge, man. And it's just this idea of, it can be one person, it can be a round table of 15, right? But like just being able to bounce ideas and things off of somebody else that is, like-minded, similar position, has some strengths. They're just providing an alternative perspective. You can go on forever, right?
I mean, who was the original mastermind, right? It was the disciples.
Yeah.
Like 12 dudes. Like the OG mastermind creator was Christ, right? And it's like, that's where it cracks me up whenever I hear like all this marketing stuff and like all these different things. Like, you need to do this like crazy thing. And then you're like, people have been doing this for thousands of years. Like they've been getting in small groups together. They've been radically transparent with each other. They've been bouncing business ideas off of people. Like one of my favorite stories in the Bible is the parable of the talents, where if people aren't familiar, basically the owner, like some rich guy, is going to go away on business, and he gives 3 servants different amounts of money. He gives them 10 talents, 5 talents, and 1 talent. A talent is like 20 years worth of wages, if you didn't know that. So it's like a weight of gold, I think is like the way it goes. But like some people basically extrapolate that like 1 talent was like 20 years worth of wages. And so basically he's creating these funds. He created a 10 talent fund, 5 talent fund, and a 1 talent fund. And it's just really cool the way God, specifically with entrepreneurs, takes those talents, and how did he want them to use them? Did he want them to take those 10 talents and bury them and become like a monk, basically, and not actually go out and try to create stuff? Or did he want them to take those 10 talents, leverage them, make them into something more, get a return on that, and all the different ancillary things that come along with building something? And the answer is he wanted them to build stuff. Like he basically, the 10 talent guy, he goes out there and makes 10 more talents and says like, hey God, here's what I did, or master, this is what I did. And gets the thumbs up. Same thing with the 5 talent guy. But the 1 talent guy basically just buries the talent, doesn't do anything with it. And the master's response is like, you could have at least like put it in a money market account and got me 5% on my money. You could have done something, but instead you let the tax on everybody, inflation, just eat away at my money. He didn't say inflation, but you get the point. And so a lot of really, really cool business lessons I think you can glean out of the Bible. And I think without over spiritualizing it as well. Like I don't really subscribe to like, I think there are times in the world where God will literally be like, Devin, flip houses in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Like that's your new goal. That's your mission. That specific thing. I don't think that happens that often. I know it hasn't really happened for us. I think a lot of times the way God speaks to entrepreneurs is more like, go in a direction that's directionally accurate. Like Tyler and Lindsay, like community is really what fills your cup up and what makes you feel most alive. Pursue opportunities that allow you to invest in a community, and pursue opportunities that allow you to grow deeper in those things. And so when you read the Bible that way, me and Adam finished reading the whole Bible this year together. We were both on the same Bible in a Year program. But when you read the Bible through a lens of an entrepreneur, it's like, okay, where are the places that like I can give God trust on the timeline, and then I can apply the urgency to that thing? Because when the rich landowner gave those talents, he didn't tell them when they were coming back. He just gave them the money and said, go. And so, yeah, I love reading the Bible and listening to podcasts and reading books that look through that on a biblical lens. And it also kind of releases a lot of pressure on you for the results of it, as long as you're being faithful in those things.
Yeah, no, man, I agree. And I love that you mentioned that. And I think the other part is, at least, for me, I have a reference, right? And that reference is the Bible. And so, a lot of times, I'm imperfect. So a lot of times I'll be beating my head against the wall, and I'm just like, struggling. And I'm like, oh yeah, duh. Like, let me go reference here. Right. But like, at least having that, being able to reference that has been super powerful as well. And I think like spirituality, faith, religion aside, you and I share the same faith. I'm passionate about what I believe. Because of that. Yeah. I think that other people should believe it too. 100%. I think you're crazy if you don't, right? But that aside, The Bible is still such a good reference book for how to live life and do business. I mean, there's reason for that, we know, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, even that right there, you're talking about in Matthew 25, right? 100%. You could have at least put it in a money market account. In other words, right? You had just buried it in the ground, did nothing with it.
And I think there's also a danger of using religion and using the Bible as an excuse for mediocrity. And that's another reason why I love the talents, because I know people, I'm pretty networked with Christian entrepreneurs, and they'll be like, yeah, we're just not going to make that much money because, just trust in God to be faithful. It's no, the reason you're not going to make money is because you sucked and you didn't put the work in. And so there's a double-edged sword to that equation that I think people can use religion and use faith as a way to manipulate and try to get capital for a business. Be oh, give money to Tyler because he's a nice guy and he's a Christian. It should be that. That should be something that drives people to want to do business with you. But also it should be because Tyler's also a 10 talent guy.
It's going to maximize it.
He's going to give you a 2x multiple on your capital.
100%. Yeah, they complement.
Exactly. And so
they complement each other. I 100% agree with that. I love that, man. Mm-hmm. A lot of good stuff here, Tyler. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that's the way we think of all of our businesses, is community driven into meaningful work. And when you have meaningful work that's actually prosperous, you have the ability to be generous. The Bible also says the debtor is slave to the lender. If you're so over leveraged that you have obligations that you have to pay, you can't be generous. You can't give your employees a bonus. You can't give more money to philanthropic things. You can't be willing to just foot the bill for a family dinner or something like that if you have zero margin to be generous. And the best way, we've tried to raise money for anti-trafficking stuff. We've tried to do those kinds of things. It is hard to raise charity money. That is worse than raising the money we've raised for flipping houses and stuff like that by a large margin. But if you just make a stinking ton of money and you're very successful, you don't need to go ask other people for it. You can just give the money you're entrusted to. So anyways.
I appreciate it, man. And I love that line of thinking so much. I completely agree with it. And it goes back to stewardship. And like you were saying, when you're not being a good steward, right? You could argue over leverage, you put yourself in a position like that. Yeah. You're not going to be able to reap as much. You're not going to be able to contribute as much. You're not going to be able to impact as much. And I know that I've gone through that and really over the last, year and a half, man, I have been buckling down on, profitability because of that, right? Because I'm profitability equals impact in the most basic sense. Profitability equals impact. So let's start there and then let's work backwards, where the time preceding that, it was just a million, such an easy number. Everything's a million this, a million that, a million, blah, 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 whatever, man. But it no longer became about 7, 8, 9, 10 figures, whatever. It was just okay, but what about profit? And then once we had a baseline, it was okay, now can we maximize and can we grow that? Of course, we're going to have to grow revenue. We're going to have to grow people. We're going to have to grow these other things. But, and it's it's a business. It's a system that feeds itself. So tons of benefits from that as well. Okay, Tyler. So you started out flipping. I know we talked about this a little bit pre-show. And then you said you got into some new construction. There were some other real estate ventures I think you got into. And then amongst some other things, I know you used your analytical skills to work on some projects there as well. Can you share the background of that? How did you go from a sort of a house flipping company, and it was Waco, Texas is where you were actually flipping to, right? Yeah. So house flipping right. Company in Waco, Texas, to what it is now and all these other ventures that you have.
Yeah. I mean, going back to talking through people not hitting their stride till they're 50, 31, man, I still feel I don't know what I'm doing when I'm going to grow up. I say that all the time, but our journey through flipping houses, what that did is it opened a lot of different doors into other things. And for us, flipping houses was always a means to an end. It wasn't the end in and of itself. And so we didn't set out to be the world's best house flippers. We set out to be people who are able to build a big business that would be able to be generous. And that was kind of our initial like founding thought, was like, if we can just make a bunch of money, we can take care of our family, we can take care of our extended family, and we can also make an impact on the world that way. That led me to being like a consultant for different businesses. So there's I ran sales and marketing for a gym in Michigan for like a year and a half, basically like imagine fractional COO, CTO type stuff. And so implemented that, kind of raised a sales team there, cut out a lot of different inefficiencies in that business. And now after a year, they're rocking and rolling, doing their thing. Worked at a startup for a year and a half as a data scientist. And so that was like a real estate education mastermind group called Better Life. And the cool kicker about Better Life is that we donated 100% of the profits from year one to anti-trafficking work.
And so
it was like, perfect, exactly what we're trying to do. Yeah, this worked. And so that was like a home run there. And then probably a failure was I was a fractional data scientist for a manufacturing company and just couldn't crack the nut there and didn't get the results that we really wanted. And that was like a 6-month contract basically. But learned a ton through it. And it was one of those things where, especially in the land of AI, machine learning with ChatGPT and OpenAI and all those different companies, they're coming to the forefront. People think that they all need machine learning and AI at all aspects of everything they're doing. But what I've found working inside of like 3 pretty large companies at that stage, the reality is like they need good processes and good like systems in order to create the data that you would then want to feed to a machine learning model or an AI or stuff like that, depending on what your use case is. But that all to be said, all those things are not real estate. I guess the real estate mastermind, like that makes sense. It was kind of brought to me because of the fact that I knew a guy, Alex Felice, shout out Alex Felice, another war room dude. But love Alex to death. He's become a really good friend. But yeah, he's such a knucklehead. But and everyone would agree that they love Miss Kate, his fiance, more. But anyways, I won't digress. I'm sure Alex will come on here and riff at you for whatever. But those 3 different things was like a foray into what does it look like to be an aid to a business that's already running, kind of doing like 1.5 million in EBITDA or more, and working inside of more of a corporate structure instead of the very unstructured world that I had created as an entrepreneur, right? And so like I'm making up all the rules, I'm doing all those things. Now go ahead and plant me and work with other folks at a high level and figure those things out. And so that was kind of like one phase that we went through. And then from there, we started a offshore staffing company. Mainly because we were growing internally, and Christine, who's been my EA since 21, I think 22. So she's been with us for a while now. We went through the same headhunting agency to find a developer that we're going to use across all of our businesses. And after we went through that process, Christine's like, Tyler, we need to just do this. Like, we should not be hiring another company to go find people. Lo and behold, Christine, who's also working through her master's in psychology right now, she had experience as a recruiter before she got hired on with us those years ago. And so she's like, I can do this. And it's funny, like the feeling I had about putting Christine in charge of something like this was one of those things where I was like, man, I don't want her to like hire somebody and then it really not work out and then feel terrible about it. Or like we got to fire that person or whatever it is. Kind of limiting beliefs on my end. But people would just constantly talk to me about like, how are you doing this while you're still active duty? And I'm pretty sensitive to that in reality too. You can make yourself, going back to like the marketing world of, you can make yourself look really big, like you're doing a whole lot of things, but in reality, you're actually not doing that many things. And so what people didn't see was like 2019 through 22, building something that actually had systems and processes in place and being able to hire those things out, and then returning to a full-time data science job for the Marine Corps and still having all those things run and people from the outside not being able to see those things. With this business, what was important was that Christine would basically run the majority of it, and I would insert myself into more like a consultant coach role for the folks that we hire for. And so, but people would constantly be asking me like, you're still active duty. Like, how the heck are you doing all these things when you're active duty? And I was like, well, I mean, I've got like 3 full-time people that work for me that are doing all these things. That's how we're able to do these things. And so 2 of those people are virtual assistants, or at the time were virtual assistants. And so people would ask me like, how'd you get them? I was like, well, go to this website. And I was basically just referring my own business away to somebody else. And so Christine was seeing that. It's like, we need to start doing that. And so I think it was May, June of this year. So a very new business still. I started saying, yeah, we can help you find that person. We just charge a placement fee and we make sure it's good and all those kinds of things. And we had kind of like your, there's this really good book. It's like, there's no like early adopters, just like early beachhead customers, basically. It's like the people that like had the faith in you at the very beginning when things were sloppy as all get out, and they still were willing to like give you money to do the thing. And so we had a core group of like 5 or 7 people that were like, hey, I need help. Can you help me find this person? And so we did. And that business has been super, super fun and rewarding to run, just because we're actually providing jobs for folks. And we're doing it in such a way that is such a win-win for people, because we're not charging ongoing fees. And so in the Philippines, if you're not aware, like essentially the median income for a job is like $800 to $900 a month for full-time work in the Philippines. And what we're hiring people for, they're making between $1,200 and $1,600 a month for full-time equivalent. And so that's upper middle class, like very quickly, right? And we've had thousands of people that we've put through the interview process and looked at their resumes and all those kinds of things. And something that I never thought would matter, and there was a huge blessing out of COVID for Americans, but they've kind of figured that out in the Philippines a lot earlier, is their infrastructure is not great in the Philippines, to where they have like 1-lane highways, 2-lane roads and stuff like that. And so some of the people that we're hiring had been working in an office like for legit Fortune 500 companies doing very high level work, but they were taking 3-4 hours one way to get to those jobs and making less money at those jobs. And so these virtual from home jobs for them, we're giving them back 8 hours of their day and they're getting paid more. It's like, yeah, let's an absolute no brainer. And then on the flip side, we do see a lot of the VAs from the Philippines, where we're hiring out of, really, really outperforming people that are in the States, which, for better or worse, it's like, it's the results driven stuff, and the jobs that they're willing to do are, and we're both like probably pretty sensitive to that because we're both patriots. I love America.
I love that you brought that up.
But I love...
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love that you brought that up, because that's a really tough topic. And honestly, man, I might look at this podcast a year, 2 years from now and sort of change my mindset. But I think if I had to guess, I'm probably right where you're at. I 100% am a patriot. I was looking at a product yesterday. I found it at 30% less, made from China. It was important to me that I got the made in the USA one. I paid more because I know for a fact exactly where it was made. It was made in the US. Like, that's my line of thinking, right? These are gift items. So you take that and then you add in the entrepreneur in me and the sort of environment. I grew up in the military. I grew up wrestling. Like, you have to judge things off of results, right? And it's in my nature. I believe it to be biblical, lends itself to stewardship. Like, man, that's at the end of the day, like, the people that get results are the people that are rewarded. In business, you see this too. If you can get results, bring people value, you're going to be rewarded. It's just how this world works, man. And so for me, I've seen a similar thing where some of the VAs I've experienced, like, I don't know, like, I don't know what to say. You know, it's like, is it frustrating that, you know, in the US, your equivalent job pays a $60K a year salary and they're making, you know, $15,000 a year? but they're doing better work. Like, what's to say, like, what's fair? Like, is it, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not just about the money. It's about the actual result and the output. I have an executive assistant. I've had her for a while. I previously had a local executive assistant that did not work out. And I paid 3 times as much as I pay my executive assistants with limited experience who lives in the Philippines. And at first I was kind of like, I don't know. She crushes it. She's hungry. She learns like nobody I've ever met. And like it, and that's why she's going to continue to grow, right? Like,
and I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. And because I had that conversation, we hired for a structural engineering firm out of Pittsburgh. And he had a US based, like lived in Pittsburgh assistant. And he's like, I don't want to fire this lady because I'm hiring this other person. And basically what I tell him, or I tell other people when they have that line of thinking, is I'm like, listen, this is a supplement and an enhancement to your current staff. Like we're not in the business of getting people's jobs taken away from them. We are in the business of making sure that everyone is optimized for doing exactly what they should be doing. And if you have a person in the US that's able to do different things than a person overseas, or be in person to do things that have to be done in person, like supervising job sites or doing those different things, going to the bank and physically showing up at the bank to sign paperwork and all those kinds of things, those are the things that person should be doing. And guess what? Your personal assistant that you had hired in real life, she probably didn't want to be doing those things. But the person in the Philippines wants to do those things because they see the value in it. And it's also just a different kind of culture. And so I don't because I thought a lot about that. I was like, do I want to start a staffing agency that's like potentially removing American jobs from Americans? And I'm like, actually, I think the math that I always do before we hire somebody new is like, is this person going to 4X their revenue by bringing that person into the business? So if I'm paying somebody $1,000 a month, am I going to be able to make $4,000 that month more because that person showed up? And specifically for real estate people, the math is so dumb simple. Like if you're flipping houses and you hire an EA and that person lets you flip one more successful house, they paid for themselves for that entire year, right? And that's why we hired Christine originally. It was like, is she going to let me flip another house this year? It's like, absolutely. And then all the fringe benefits of having a full-time executive assistant are insane. I always look at it as a both and, not an either or, because at the end of the day, like the people in the US are gifted to do certain things, and same thing goes in the Philippines. And you could probably pay that person in real life more if they were handling higher revenue activities than answering the phone calls and stuff like that. Like if that in-person assistant is going to properties every day instead of like being chained to a desk, like that's a huge value, and they're probably going to like it more. So I think it's really one of the biggest win-wins that exist. And most people can't afford to pay that $60,000 a year employee if they're entrepreneurs and they're starting out. But you can sure as heck figure out a way to scrape together $10,000 or $15,000 to let you grow to the point where you have on-site staff. And so that's kind of where I see the bridge with the VA ecosystem is I think that they help you get from like not having enough revenue to be able to support on-site staff to growing in efficiencies to where now that person that you hire on site, you might be paying them $100,000 because they're handling big problems.
No, man, I love that. I love that you highlighted that. It's not either or, it can be both. Yeah, absolutely, man. To your point, like it depends on the type of work, right? So like in my instance, I don't know. I guess limiting beliefs, maybe I felt more comfortable hiring somebody local, but like apples to apples, money aside, when you look at them just as candidates, the clear winner, the clearer, like better candidate happened to be the one in the Philippines that just happens to make less. And then when you consider like, right person, right seat, same thing. Like it was way more fitting for this person based on a myriad of things. And so I agree with you, man. When you're able to look at it like that, it doesn't have to be, oh, well, I'm going to replace everybody in my brick and mortar office with VAs and outsource to the Philippines because that's better for our bottom line. It's like, no, that's not how you look at this. You look at it as like, what's the role? What needs to be done? Who can fit that role? Like you had said, that for like administrative stuff, remote work is the new thing. Like, most things can be done remotely. So that opens up to a lot of things. When you're talking, checking on projects or I don't know, whatever job that requires boots on the ground, like, okay, well, that eliminates a lot of remote work, right? Now, all those candidates in that candidate pool are no longer fitting. So
yeah, it's the same conversation people have with AI and machine learning and all those things, where it's like we're replacing jobs with machines now instead of just VAs. And it's like, well, actually, it's kind of nice to have a note taker instead of a secretary in my thing, because that note taker doesn't miss things. And now I can, instead of having that secretary just take notes, I can have them read the notes and execute on the tasks that happened from that meeting, instead of just kind of losing it all to the ether. And yeah, I don't know. I just think there's a lot to unpack there. We could probably have a whole nother episode talking about those things.
We could for sure. Yeah, no, because you're right. And I think it follows. It's the same problem I see, where it's like, well, no, the role's changing. The role isn't being replaced. For us, AI has been powerful, not to replace jobs, but to replace certain responsibilities. Well, guess what happens then? The people that had those responsibilities, their responsibility now shifts. It's not the responsibility goes away. It's just the way it's executed. It is different. And it's the same with incorporating BAs. This is something where I have them in my other companies too now for certain things. And it's again, because it's more fitting. It's more powerful. It's more helpful that way. It's just a better move without, going into the weeds on it. Right.
I could literally talk about VAs and that kind of stuff forever. So you got to cut me off at some point, or else we're just going to yap about that.
You've shared with us a lot of good stuff, man. And I think one of the big things that I've seen from you is, man, be open to things might not be exactly what you think they are, but you continue to take the steps, you're going to figure it out eventually. For our audience, for somebody who's, just starting as an entrepreneur right now, or let's say, they're flipping houses and they're like, hey man, I think I want to buy off market real estate, but I don't know if I want to flip or I want to wholesale, or, hey, I think I should start a cleaning company, or maybe I should start a landscaping company or whatever. But they're in that situation right now. What would be your biggest advice to them to avoid getting in this trap of like, it needs to look like this, that, or whatever?
It is okay for things to be very, very difficult. And I think that there's times where you just see the highlight reel from other people, whether they're like, even like this podcast, you may think that I've got everything figured out because I'm speaking from authority on a podcast, but I can assure you there's a million things that we do not have figured out, and that we're still currently building the airplane as it's flying, right? And so with that, it's like, man, it is okay for it to be hard. And that is part of the process for figuring out kind of what you want to do with your life. And so for somebody like wanting to also discover what it is that they want to do, I'm a big fan of short-term relationships. And so like all of our businesses so far, like other than my wife, we're not getting into super long-term business relationships with people. Structuring things in such a way to where you have an out early if you need to, or they have an out early if you need to. And flipping houses is a great example because you can go project to project, right? You don't need to spin up a whole new company to do the first deal with somebody. You can just do Devin and Tyler joint venture. We're doing this specific house at this address. And if it goes great, cool, do another one. If that goes great, cool, do another one. And then if you get to a point where like, okay, you know what, we're doing all these deals together and it actually makes more sense for us to incorporate something together, then go ahead and build a company that way. But don't feel like you need to go get super high speed and like 15 different LLCs to layer protections, because in reality, I don't really buy that there's much protection anyways. But I'm not a lawyer or a JTAC or a CPA. And so do not take this as legal advice or clear for fires. That would be the other thing. It's okay for it to be really hard, and it's kind of meant to be hard, I think. I think that's one of the best ways that kind of God structures our lives is by giving us hard things to do. But then also it's like date before you get married, man. Like do not build something that where you're going to be in a nightmare relationship with somebody for a very, very extended period of time. And then add in the fact that you probably have investment capital inside that vehicle that doesn't belong to you. That's a whole nother can of worms.
Oh, but yeah.
That would be if I had to sum it up into two things for somebody who's starting out.
I love it, man. Yeah. Thank you for that. Wise words, my friend. Okay, Tyler. So as we wrap up here, where can members of our audience connect with you? Where can they find out more about LTG Investments, LTG Assist, and everything that you have coming up into the future? And if you would share a little bit about that as well.
We have our website, ltginvestments.com. That's pretty much the one-stop shop for everything that we're doing. You can sign up for a newsletter there. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's typically where I live. As far as social media stuff goes. But yeah, the future's wide open. I've got 2026, summer 26 is when I'm able to get off active duty. And it's probably what we're going to end up doing here. Looking at a bunch of different kind of opportunities, ranging from real estate, ranging to more tech startup space. And so, yeah, if you want to follow along with what we end up doing, that the best way is probably our newsletter that we're going to really revamp here in 25. But that's a one-stop shop, just ltginvestments.com.
ltginvestments.com. Awesome. We'll make sure we put it in the show notes as well. Tyler, thank you so much, man. It has been a pleasure. Thank you for all you shared. A lot of good gold nuggets in there. Yeah, man, I appreciate you.
Appreciate you too, man. This was great.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much for joining us again today. Until next time.